What happens when an untouchable princess who dismisses every commoner within hours meets someone who refuses to bow down to her royal arrogance? Princess Lysandra had a reputation that spread across 7 kingdoms. No common person could last even one day in her presence. Until she arrived and said something that would shatter everything the princess believed about nobility, worth, and power. Today I'm going to tell you an incredible story about how one fearless woman challenged a spoiled princess and changed the future of an entire kingdom forever. But before we dive in, tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from? I love connecting with viewers from all around the world. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button right now. Because transformational stories like this one that will completely change how you think about true nobility and respect, you'll only find here on this channel. Are you ready for a story that will leave you speechless? Princess Lysandra of Valenhall was notorious throughout the 7 kingdoms for her complete disdain toward anyone not born into nobility. At 25 years old, she possessed a sharp intellect that she wielded like a weapon against those she deemed beneath her station, and an icy beauty that seemed to freeze the very air around her when she was displeased. Her reputation for cruelty toward commoners had spread far beyond the palace walls, creating a legend of a princess so removed from ordinary humanity that even her own servants feared to meet her gaze directly. The princess had been raised in an environment of absolute privilege, surrounded by tutors who praised her every thought and servants who anticipated her every need before she could even express it. Her education had been comprehensive but entirely theoretical. She knew 17 languages, could recite the complete genealogies of every noble house in the known world, and had mastered advanced mathematics and philosophy. However, she had never experienced genuine hardship, never been denied anything she desired, and never been forced to consider the perspectives of people whose lives differed dramatically from her own pampered existence. King Aldric had grown increasingly concerned about his daughter's complete disconnection from the common people she would one day rule. Her mother, Queen Isabella, had died when Lysandra was only 12, taking with her the gentle influence that might have tempered the girl's natural arrogance with compassion and understanding. In the 13 years since Isabella's death, Lysandra had become progressively more isolated from reality, treating the castle staff with casual cruelty and displaying complete indifference to the welfare of her future subjects. The king had attempted various approaches to broaden his daughter's perspective and develop her empathy for common people. He had arranged for her to observe court proceedings where commoners sought justice, hoping she would gain understanding of their struggles and concerns. Instead, Lysandra had become bored within minutes and spent the time critiquing the petitioners' grammar and appearance rather than listening to their actual problems. She had been assigned to oversee certain charitable activities, but she delegated all actual work to subordinates while taking credit for their efforts without ever interacting directly with the people being helped. Most frustrating of all were Lysandra's attempts to interact with commoners who worked within the palace itself. King Aldric had specifically instructed his daughter to spend time learning about the various roles and responsibilities that kept the castle functioning, believing that understanding these operations would help her appreciate the contributions of ordinary people. However, every commoner assigned to work with the princess lasted less than a day before requesting reassignment, or, in some cases, leaving the royal service entirely rather than endure her condescending treatment and impossible demands. Master Thomas, the castle's head carpenter and a man renowned for his patience and skill, had lasted exactly 6 hours working with Princess Lysandra on a project designed to teach her about practical construction techniques. She had criticized his methods without understanding their purposes, demanded that he explain concepts she then dismissed as peasant knowledge, and finally declared that manual labor was beneath her dignity and walked away in the middle of his instruction. Sarah the weaver, whose tapestries adorned the walls of neighboring kingdoms' palaces, had been asked to teach the princess traditional textile arts. Lysandra had lasted 4 hours before declaring that working with her hands was common and degrading, suggesting that Sarah's techniques were primitive and inefficient, and demanding to know why the lesson couldn't be conducted through purely theoretical discussion rather than actual practice. The royal chef, Master Henri, had attempted to teach Princess Lysandra basic cooking skills, believing that understanding food preparation would help her appreciate the effort required to maintain the elaborate feasts she took for granted. The lesson had ended after 3 hours when Lysandra accused Henri of deliberately making tasks more difficult than necessary, declared that cooking was servants' work that should remain invisible to nobility, and stormed out after burning her finger on a pot handle. The pattern repeated itself with every commoner who attempted to work with the princess. She approached each interaction with predetermined assumptions about the inferiority of non-noble knowledge and skills, dismissed any instruction that required her to acknowledge expertise she didn't already possess, and treated every person of common birth as fundamentally less intelligent and valuable than herself. Her arrogance was so complete, and her condescension so automatic that even the most patient and skilled workers found her presence unbearable within hours. King Aldrich watched these failures with growing despair, recognizing that his daughter's attitude would make her a terrible ruler when she eventually inherited the throne. A monarch who couldn't relate to or respect the common people would inevitably become a tyrant, ruling through fear and force rather than genuine authority based on mutual respect and understanding. He had tried reasoning with Lysandra, threatening punishment, and even bribing her with rewards for improved behavior, but nothing seemed capable of penetrating her absolute certainty that nobility made her inherently superior to everyone else. The king's advisors had begun suggesting that perhaps Princess Lysandra was simply incapable of change, that her personality had been too firmly established in arrogance and selfishness to be reformed at this stage of her life. Some recommended accepting her limitations and focusing on surrounding her with advisors who could compensate for her lack of empathy when she became queen. Others suggested more drastic measures, including the possibility of naming a different successor who might be better suited to rule effectively. As King Aldrich contemplated these increasingly desperate options, he remained unaware that a solution to his daughter's problems was about to arrive at the palace gates in the most unexpected form possible. Someone was coming who would challenge Princess Lysandra in ways that no previous teacher or advisor had ever attempted, someone whose very presence would force the arrogant princess to confront the fundamental assumptions about worth and value that had shaped her entire worldview. The stage was set for a confrontation that would either transform Princess Lysandra into someone capable of genuine leadership or confirm once and for all that she was irredeemably lost to arrogance and cruelty. The next commoner to work with the princess would be different from all the others, not because of superior patience or exceptional skills, but because of a willingness to speak truths that no one else had dared to voice directly to the untouchable princess. On a crisp autumn morning when golden leaves danced on the wind and the first frost of the season painted delicate patterns on the palace windows, a young woman approached the gates of Valenhall Castle, carrying nothing but a worn leather satchel and wearing clothes that marked her unmistakably as a commoner. The guards at the gate almost turned her away, assuming she was another hopeful servant seeking employment in the royal kitchens or laundry, but her confident bearing and direct manner of speech convinced them to at least listen to her unusual request. "My name is Elena Hartwell," she announced, her voice clear and unintimidated by the imposing architecture surrounding her, "and I'm here to serve as tutor to Princess Lysandra. I believe King Aldrich has been expecting someone with my qualifications." The guards exchanged puzzled glances, uncertain how to respond to this claim. They had indeed heard that the king was desperately seeking someone capable of working with his difficult daughter, but they had expected any successful candidate to arrive with proper credentials, letters of introduction, or at least the appearance of someone qualified to instruct royalty. Elena appeared to be perhaps 23 years old, with auburn hair braided simply down her back and intelligent brown eyes that seemed to assess everything around her with calm interest rather than the nervous deference typically shown by commoners entering the royal presence. Her clothing was well-made but obviously practical rather than decorative, a wool dress in deep blue that showed signs of travel but was clean and properly maintained, sturdy leather boots designed for walking rather than appearance, and a cloak that had clearly provided protection from weather rather than serving as fashion statement. Everything about her suggested competence and self-sufficiency, but nothing indicated the kind of extraordinary background that would qualify her to work with a princess who had defeated every previous attempt at instruction. When word of Elena's arrival reached King Aldrich, he felt a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. His extensive search for someone capable of reaching his daughter had focused primarily on renowned scholars, experienced diplomats, and other nobles who might command Lysandra's respect through their elevated status. The idea that a young common woman might succeed where so many distinguished individuals had failed seemed almost absurd, yet his desperation had reached the point where he was willing to consider any possibility. "Send her to me immediately," the king commanded, deciding that he had nothing to lose by interviewing this unexpected candidate. If she proved unsuitable, he could dismiss her quickly and continue his search elsewhere. If she possessed some hidden qualification or insight that might help his daughter, He needed to discover it as soon as possible. Elena entered the throne room with a confident stride that suggested she was accustomed to important meetings, though her simple attire created a stark contrast with the elaborate ceremony that typically surrounded royal audiences. She offered a respectful curtsy to King Aldrich but maintained eye contact throughout, demonstrating the proper deference without the anxious subservience that usually characterized commoners in the royal presence. "Your Majesty," she said when invited to explain her presence, "I understand that Princess Lysandra has experienced difficulty connecting with commoners who have attempted to serve as her instructors. I believe I can offer a different approach that might prove more successful than previous attempts." King Aldrich studied this young woman carefully, trying to identify what gave her such confidence in addressing a challenge that had defeated so many others. Her manner suggested education and intelligence, but nothing in her appearance indicated noble birth or exceptional academic credentials that might explain her self-assurance. "And what exactly qualifies you to work with my daughter where others have failed?" the king asked, genuinely curious about what answer she might provide. Elena smiled slightly, and there was something in her expression that suggested she had anticipated this question and prepared a response that might surprise him. "Your Majesty, I believe that previous tutors have failed because they approached Princess Lysandra with the assumption that she should be treated with the same deference and indulgence she has received throughout her life. Perhaps what she actually needs is someone willing to treat her as an equal rather than as a superior, someone who will challenge her assumptions rather than confirming her prejudices." This answer was so different from the careful diplomacy and elaborate flattery that typically characterized interactions with royalty that King Aldrich found himself genuinely intrigued. Most people who sought positions working with Lysandra emphasized their eagerness to serve her needs and their dedication to maintaining her comfort and dignity. Elena seemed to be suggesting an entirely different approach based on direct confrontation rather than accommodation. "You realize," the king said carefully, "that my daughter has dismissed previous instructors for far less challenging behavior than what you seem to be proposing. She does not react well to being contradicted or questioned, particularly by those she considers her social inferiors." "With respect, Your Majesty," Elena replied, her tone remaining calm but her words carrying conviction that commanded attention, "that reaction is precisely the problem that needs to be addressed. A future queen who cannot tolerate disagreement or acknowledge expertise from any source will inevitably become a tyrant who rules through fear rather than respect. If Princess Lysandra is truly as intelligent as her reputation suggests, she is capable of learning to value truth over flattery and competence over birthright." King Aldrich felt his eyebrows rising in surprise at this remarkably direct assessment of his daughter's character flaws. No previous candidate for working with Lysandra had dared to speak so bluntly about her problems, and certainly none had suggested that her fundamental attitudes towards social hierarchy might need to change rather than simply be accommodated. "And if she proves unwilling to consider such changes?" the king asked, testing whether Elena had truly thought through the implications of her proposed approach. "Then she will dismiss me, just as she has dismissed everyone else," Elena answered with a slight shrug that suggested she had indeed considered and accepted this possibility. "But at least she will have heard truths that no one else has been willing to speak to her directly. Sometimes the most valuable lessons are the ones that initially provoke anger rather than acceptance." This response convinced King Aldrich that Elena possessed both the courage and the insight that might be necessary to reach his stubborn daughter. Her willingness to risk immediate failure in pursuit of genuine progress suggested a level of commitment that went beyond mere desire for employment or advancement. "Very well," the king decided. "You may attempt to work with Princess Lysandra. However, I must warn you that she has never tolerated any commoner's presence for more than a few hours. Are you prepared for the possibility that this will be the shortest tutorial appointment in the history of this kingdom?" Elena's smile broadened, and for the first time since entering the throne room, she displayed something that might have been genuine amusement. "Your Majesty, I would be disappointed if Princess Lysandra proved to be easily satisfied with conventional approaches. The most worthwhile challenges are rarely the easiest ones to overcome." Princess Lysandra entered her private study precisely at the appointed hour, expecting to find another nervous commoner waiting to demonstrate whatever humble skill had earned them temporary access to her presence. Her morning routine had been interrupted by her father's announcement that yet another tutor would attempt to provide her with instruction, and she approached the encounter with the weary resignation of someone who had been through this tedious process dozens of times before. What she found instead was a young woman sitting calmly at the princess's own writing desk, reading from a leather-bound journal and taking notes with the princess's personal quill pen. Elena looked up when Lysandra entered, but didn't immediately rise or offer the elaborate courtesies that the princess had come to expect from everyone of common birth. Instead, she simply nodded acknowledgement and returned her attention to the text she had been studying. "Excuse me," Lysandra said, her voice carrying the icy displeasure that typically sent servants fleeing in terror. "But you are sitting at my desk, using my writing materials, and reading what appears to be your own book rather than preparing to instruct me in whatever trivial skill you presumably possess." Elena finished the sentence she had been writing before looking up again, her expression showing mild interest rather than the immediate apology and self-effacement that Lysandra expected. "Good morning, Princess Lysandra. I was reviewing my notes about your previous educational experiences to better understand why so many capable instructors have been unable to work with you successfully." The casual tone of Elena's response, combined with her failure to immediately vacate the princess's chair, created a moment of stunned silence. No commoner had ever addressed Lysandra with such casual directness or remained seated in her presence without explicit permission. The princess found herself momentarily uncertain how to respond to this unprecedented breach of protocol. "You will stand when addressing me," Lysandra commanded, falling back on the automatic assertion of rank that had always been sufficient to establish dominance over previous tutors, "and you will explain why you believe yourself qualified to judge the capabilities of your superiors." Elena did stand, but slowly and without any appearance of deference or apology. "I stand out of courtesy, not because your birth makes you inherently superior to anyone else," she said calmly. "And I judge the capabilities of previous instructors based on their documented expertise in their respective fields, not on your personal reactions to their attempts to share that expertise with you." These words struck Lysandra like a physical blow. No one had ever dared to suggest that her noble birth didn't automatically establish her superiority over commoners, and certainly no one had implied that her dismissal of previous instructors reflected her own limitations rather than their inadequacies. "How dare you," the princess began, her voice rising with indignation, "speak to me as though we were equals? You are a commoner, and I am a princess of the blood royal. The natural order of society establishes my authority over you, and you will acknowledge that fact or remove yourself from my presence immediately." Elena listened to this outburst without apparent distress or intimidation, waiting until Lysandra had finished speaking before responding in the same calm tone she had maintained throughout their encounter. "Princess, you are indeed of royal birth, and that accident of genetics has provided you with privileges and opportunities that most people will never enjoy. However, your bloodline doesn't give you the right to dismiss knowledge and expertise simply because they come from sources you consider socially inferior." The word accident, applied to her royal heritage, sent Lysandra into a rage that had been building since Elena's first casual greeting. "Get out!" she screamed, pointing toward the door with a trembling finger. "Get out before I have you thrown into the dungeons for your insolence. No one speaks to me this way, and no one questions the divine right that places noble blood above common birth." But Elena didn't move toward the door. Instead, she returned to her seat at Lysandra's desk and picked up her pen again. "Princess, you have just demonstrated exactly why every previous instructor has failed to work with you effectively. The moment someone challenges your preconceptions or asks you to acknowledge expertise you don't already possess, you respond with threats and tantrums rather than engaging with the substance of what they're trying to teach you." This unexpected response to her command to leave left Lysandra feeling confused and increasingly angry. Previous instructors had always retreated immediately when faced with her displeasure, confirming her power and allowing her to feel justified in her dismissal of their attempts to educate her. Elena's refusal to be intimidated or driven away forced the princess to confront the possibility that her usual tactics might not be universally effective. "I said get out," Lysandra repeated, but her voice lacked the confident authority it had carried moments earlier. She was beginning to realize that Elena operated by different rules than the other commoners she had encountered, and this realization was deeply unsettling. "And I'm choosing to ignore that command," Elena replied matter-of-factly, "because you don't actually want me to leave." If you truly wanted me gone, you could summon guards to remove me physically. Instead, you're standing there arguing with me, which suggests that some part of you is curious about what I might say next. Lysandra felt a shock of recognition at these words. Elena was correct. Despite her anger and indignation, the princess found herself genuinely curious about this strange commoner who refused to be cowed by threats or impressed by royal authority. No one had ever spoken to her with such direct honesty, and while it was infuriating, it was also oddly compelling. You think you understand me, Lysandra said, trying to regain her sense of superiority through intellectual challenge rather than pure dominance. But you're just another commoner who assumes that noble birth comes with ignorance or weakness. I am more educated than any peasant could ever hope to become. Elena nodded approvingly, as though Lysandra had finally said something worth engaging with seriously. I don't doubt your education, princess. Your tutor's reports indicate that you've mastered impressive amounts of theoretical knowledge. But education and wisdom are different things, and all your learning hasn't taught you the most important lesson a future ruler needs to understand. Despite her anger, Lysandra found herself asking, and what lesson is that? Elena smiled, and there was something almost affectionate in her expression as she delivered her answer. That the people you will someday rule are not your inferiors, they are your responsibility. A queen who despises her subjects will inevitably become a tyrant, and tyrants never last long in power. The conversation that followed challenged every assumption Princess Lysandra had held about social hierarchy, noble privilege, and the sources of knowledge worth respecting. Elena proved to be remarkably well educated despite her common origins, demonstrating familiarity with classical literature, political philosophy, and historical precedents that equaled or exceeded the princess's own impressive academic background. More importantly, she applied this knowledge in ways that forced Lysandra to confront the practical implications of her attitudes and beliefs. Tell me, princess, Elena said, settling more comfortably in her chair and opening her journal to a page filled with neat handwriting. What do you believe qualifies someone to rule over others? Is it simply the accident of being born to the right parents, or should leadership be based on more substantial criteria? Lysandra felt the familiar surge of anger that accompanied any challenge to the divine right of noble birth, but Elena's calm manner and obvious intelligence made it difficult to dismiss the question as mere impertinence. Noble blood carries with it the burden of responsibility and the cultivation of virtues necessary for leadership, she replied, falling back on lessons learned from childhood tutors. Common people lack the breeding, education, and natural refinement that prepare one for the complex demands of governance. Interesting theory, Elena responded, making a note in her journal. So you believe that noble parents consistently produce children who are naturally more virtuous, intelligent, and capable than those born to common families? And that this superiority is so reliable that it justifies giving nobles automatic authority over everyone else, regardless of their individual merits or failings? The way Elena phrased the question made Lysandra's position sound less obviously correct than it had when stated as simple fact. The princess found herself considering examples that didn't fit neatly into her assumptions. She had certainly known nobles who were foolish, cruel, or incompetent, while some of the castle's servants displayed remarkable intelligence and moral character. There are exceptions to every rule, Lysandra admitted reluctantly. But in general, noble breeding produces superior individuals who are naturally suited to positions of authority and responsibility. Elena nodded, as though this were a reasonable starting point for further discussion, rather than a conclusion to be accepted without question. Let's test that theory with specific examples, she suggested, pulling out a different notebook filled with what appeared to be detailed records. I've been researching the backgrounds of everyone who has attempted to instruct you over the past several years. Would you like to hear about their qualifications and accomplishments? Before Lysandra could object, Elena began reading from her notes. Master Thomas, the carpenter you dismissed after 6 hours, designed and built the cathedral in Westmarch that has been praised by architects throughout the known world. His innovations in structural engineering have been adopted in major construction projects across 3 kingdoms, and his mathematical understanding of load distribution exceeds what most university-trained scholars achieve. This information surprised Lysandra, who had assumed that a carpenter's knowledge must be limited to simple manual tasks. She had never considered that Master Thomas might possess sophisticated theoretical understanding that went far beyond basic woodworking skills. Sarah the Weaver, Elena continued, has created textile innovations that have revolutionized cloth production in 4 different kingdoms. Her understanding of dye chemistry, fiber properties, and pattern mathematics has earned her consultation requests from noble houses throughout the region. Several universities have offered her teaching positions based on her contributions to mathematical understanding of complex geometric patterns. Again, Lysandra felt her assumptions being challenged. She had dismissed Sarah as a simple craftsperson, never imagining that weaving might involve advanced mathematical concepts or chemical knowledge that could impress university scholars. And Master Henri, Elena went on, trained in the royal kitchens of 3 different kingdoms before coming here. His understanding of nutrition, food chemistry, and international cuisine has made him one of the most sought-after culinary experts in the known world. His cookbook has been translated into 7 languages and is studied by chefs serving the most demanding noble households across multiple continents. With each example, Lysandra felt her certainty about the inherent superiority of noble knowledge being systematically undermined. These weren't simple servants performing basic tasks. They were accomplished experts whose skills and understanding had earned recognition from the highest levels of society. But, Lysandra protested weakly, they're still commoners. Their expertise is practical rather than intellectual, limited to specific crafts rather than the broad understanding necessary for leadership. Elena smiled, but there was no mockery in her expression. That's an interesting distinction, Princess. Tell me, when you rule this kingdom, will you never need to make decisions about construction projects, textile production, food security, or any of the other practical matters that directly affect your subjects' daily lives? Will your theoretical knowledge be sufficient to govern effectively if you don't understand how the essential systems of society actually function? This question forced Lysandra to confront something she had never considered before, the possibility that her dismissive attitude toward practical knowledge might actually make her less qualified to rule rather than more so. A queen who didn't understand how things were built, made, or grown might make decisions that created problems rather than solving them. I would have advisors, Lysandra said, but even as she spoke the words, she realized how weak her argument sounded. Advisors like Master Thomas, Sarah, and Master Henri? Elena asked gently. The same experts you've dismissed without listening to their knowledge because their common birth made you assume they had nothing valuable to teach you? The logical trap Elena had constructed was inescapable, and Lysandra felt her intellectual pride warring with a growing sense that her fundamental worldview might be flawed in ways she had never considered. For the first time in her life, she found herself genuinely uncertain about beliefs that had always seemed obviously correct. What are you suggesting? Lysandra asked, her voice lacking its usual confident authority. Elena leaned forward, her expression becoming more serious and intent. I'm suggesting, Princess, that true nobility comes from character and competence rather than bloodline, and that a wise ruler learns from every available source of knowledge rather than limiting herself to information that comes with the proper social credentials. The implications of this suggestion were staggering, requiring Lysandra to reconsider not just her attitude toward individual commoners but her entire understanding of social hierarchy and royal authority. If Elena was correct, then everything Lysandra had been taught about her inherent superiority was not just wrong but actually counterproductive to effective leadership. Elena's next words would prove to be the turning point that either transformed Princess Lysandra forever or confirmed her incapacity for change. The commoner tutor had spent hours systematically dismantling the princess's assumptions about social hierarchy and the sources of valuable knowledge, but now she prepared to issue a challenge that would force Lysandra to choose between maintaining her comfortable prejudices or embracing a radically different understanding of leadership and responsibility. Princess Lysandra, Elena said, closing her journal and focusing her complete attention on the young royal woman who had grown increasingly quiet as their conversation progressed. I propose a test that will demonstrate whether your noble education has truly prepared you to rule effectively, or whether your dismissive attitude toward common knowledge has actually made you less qualified to lead than you believe. Lysandra felt a familiar surge of defensive anger at any suggestion that her qualifications might be inadequate, but Elena's systematic demolition of her previous arguments had left her less certain about the strength of her position. What kind of test? She asked warily, uncertain whether she wanted to hear the answer. Elena stood and moved to the tall windows that overlooked the castle's courtyard and the bustling activity below. For the next week, you will live and work as a commoner within your own kingdom, without revealing your identity or relying on your royal privileges. You'll take employment in the castle's kitchens, working under Master Henry's supervision and earning your keep through actual labor rather than inherited status. The suggestion was so outrageous that Lysandra's immediate impulse was to reject it entirely. Absolutely not, she declared, her voice regaining some of its imperious authority. I am a princess of the blood royal, not a servant girl who can be assigned to menial labor. Such work is beneath my dignity and inappropriate for someone of my station. Elena had clearly anticipated this reaction and remained calm in the face of Lysandra's indignation. Your response proves exactly what I suspected, princess. You claim that noble birth qualifies you to rule over common people, but you're afraid to experience their lives directly because you know that such experience would challenge your assumptions about your own superiority. This accusation of cowardice struck Lysandra more deeply than any previous challenge to her authority. Throughout her privileged life, she had been praised for her intelligence, criticized for her arrogance, and occasionally scolded for her cruelty, but no one had ever suggested that she might be afraid to face reality. I'm not afraid of anything, Lysandra protested, but even as she spoke the words, she recognized their defensive tone and realized that Elena might have identified something true about her character that she had never been forced to acknowledge. Then prove it, Elena replied simply. Accept the challenge and demonstrate that your noble upbringing has indeed prepared you to understand and lead the people you claim are naturally inferior to yourself. Show me that you can succeed in their world using only the knowledge and skills that your superior education has provided. Lysandra found herself trapped between her pride and her fear, unable to refuse Elena's challenge without appearing cowardly, yet terrified of accepting a test that might reveal fundamental weaknesses in her character and preparation for leadership. The very idea of working alongside common servants, following their instructions, and performing physical labor was deeply disturbing to someone who had never been required to do anything more strenuous than hold a pen or turn the pages of a book. And what if I refuse? Lysandra asked, hoping to find an escape from the impossible choice Elena had presented. Then you prove that your noble birth has made you weak rather than strong, privileged rather than prepared, and fundamentally unfit to rule over people whose lives you're too afraid to understand, Elena answered with devastating directness. A queen who can't survive in her subjects' world has no right to make decisions that affect their daily lives. The logic was inescapable, but the personal cost of accepting Elena's challenge seemed enormous. Everything in Lysandra's upbringing rebelled against the idea of reducing herself to common labor. Yet she was beginning to recognize that her refusal might indicate exactly the kind of weakness that would make her an ineffective ruler. This is manipulation, Lysandra accused, trying to regain control of a conversation that had spiraled far beyond her expectations. You're trying to force me into a humiliating situation that has nothing to do with genuine education or leadership preparation. Elena nodded acknowledgement of the accusation while maintaining her calm, reasonable tone. You're absolutely correct that this is manipulation, princess. I am indeed trying to manipulate you into confronting truths about yourself and your world that you've successfully avoided for 25 years. The question is whether you have the courage to accept that manipulation in service of genuine growth, or whether you'll choose to remain safely ignorant. Something in Elena's tone, not mocking or superior, but genuinely challenging and even hopeful, made Lysandra realize that this strange commoner actually believed she was capable of change and growth. The recognition that someone saw potential in her that went beyond her current arrogance and limitations was surprisingly moving, even though the path to realizing that potential seemed terrifying. If I accept this ridiculous challenge, Lysandra said slowly, what guarantee do I have that you won't simply use my compliance to further humiliate me or expose me to public ridicule? Elena's expression grew more serious, and when she spoke, her words carried a sincerity that Lysandra found herself trusting despite her suspicions. Princess, my purpose is not to humiliate you but to educate you. If you complete this challenge successfully, you'll emerge with understanding and capabilities that will make you a far better ruler than any amount of theoretical education could provide. If you fail, the only person who will be humiliated is yourself, and that humiliation might be the most valuable lesson you ever receive. After several long minutes of internal struggle, Lysandra made the decision that would change the course of her life forever. "Very well," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I accept your challenge. But I want it clearly understood that I'm doing this to prove my superior capabilities, not because I accept your criticisms of noble privilege or traditional social hierarchy." Elena smiled, and for the first time since their conversation began, her expression showed genuine warmth rather than patient challenge. "Understood, Princess. Your motivations are less important than your willingness to attempt something that will teach you things about yourself and your kingdom that you've never had the opportunity to learn." As Lysandra contemplated the week of common labor that lay ahead of her, she felt a mixture of terror, anger, and something that might have been anticipation. For the first time in her privileged life, she was about to discover what lay beyond the carefully maintained boundaries of her royal existence, and that discovery would either confirm her superiority or transform her understanding of everything she had always believed about herself and her world. At dawn the following morning, Princess Lysandra found herself standing in the castle's vast kitchens wearing the simple brown dress and apron of a serving girl, her elaborately styled hair hidden beneath a plain cloth cap, and her soft hands already beginning to show the effects of unfamiliar physical labor. Master Henri had been informed only that she was a new employee named Lisa, who required training in basic kitchen duties, and he had accepted her presence with the practical efficiency of a man accustomed to training inexperienced workers. The first shock came within minutes of beginning her assigned tasks. The castle's kitchens, which Lysandra had always imagined as simple spaces where food mysteriously appeared before being served in the royal dining hall, proved to be a complex operation requiring precise coordination, extensive knowledge, and remarkable physical stamina. The sheer volume of preparation required to feed the castle's hundreds of inhabitants was staggering, and the heat, noise, and constant activity created an environment more challenging than anything in Lysandra's previous experience. "Lisa," Master Henri called, using the common name Elena had suggested for her disguise, "start by washing these vegetables. Remove any damaged portions, cut them to uniform sizes according to the chart on the wall, and sort them into the appropriate baskets for today's meals." What seemed like a simple instruction proved to be surprisingly complex when actually attempted. Lysandra had never held a knife larger than what was required for cutting her food at formal dinners, and her attempts to efficiently clean and chop vegetables resulted in awkward movements, uneven pieces, and several small cuts on her inexperienced fingers. The other kitchen workers watched her struggles with amused tolerance, occasionally offering suggestions that helped her improve her technique. "Don't hold the knife like you're afraid of it," advised Mary, a middle-aged woman who had been working in the kitchens for over 20 years. "Grip it firmly and use smooth, controlled movements rather than tentative little cuts. The vegetables won't bite you, but the knife might if you don't handle it with confidence." Lysandra found herself grudgingly grateful for Mary's patient instruction, though accepting guidance from a servant felt deeply strange after a lifetime of having her every word treated as wisdom to be immediately implemented. The reversal of roles was profoundly unsettling, forcing her to acknowledge expertise in people she had never bothered to notice despite their daily presence in her environment. The second day brought assignments that required her to understand the complex logistics of meal planning and preparation. Master Henri explained the intricate process of coordinating dozens of different dishes to ensure that everything was ready at precisely the right time, accounting for varying cooking times, oven availability, and the preferences of different groups within the castle hierarchy. "The royal family expects their meals served at exactly noon and 6 o'clock, Master Henri explained, while the castle guards eat earlier, the stable workers later, and the visiting dignitaries require special accommodations based on their cultural dietary restrictions. Managing all these requirements simultaneously requires careful planning and perfect timing." Lysandra began to understand that the seemingly effortless appearance of her meals had actually required hours of advanced planning and precise coordination by dozens of skilled workers. The casual ease with which she had always criticized menu choices or complained about timing delays took on a completely different significance when she understood the complexity of the underlying operations. By the third day, Lysandra was beginning to appreciate the physical demands of manual labor and the sophisticated knowledge required to perform seemingly simple tasks effectively. Her hands had developed calluses, her back ached from hours of standing and lifting, and she had gained newfound respect for the stamina required to maintain such demanding work day after day. More importantly, she was beginning to recognize the intelligence and skill of her fellow workers in ways that her previous prejudices had prevented her from seeing. Sarah, the young scullery maid who worked beside her, proved to have an intuitive understanding of cooking chemistry that allowed her to adjust recipes based on variations in ingredients, weather conditions, and cooking equipment. When Lysandra struggled to understand why bread dough behaved differently on humid days, Sarah explained the scientific principles involved with a clarity that rivaled her formal tutor's instruction. Thomas, the elderly man who maintained the kitchen fires and managed the complex system of ovens and cooking hearths, demonstrated mathematical precision in calculating fuel requirements, temperature control, and timing that exceeded the theoretical knowledge Lysandra had gained from her advanced mathematics education. His practical application of complex calculations made abstract concepts suddenly meaningful in ways her academic instruction had never achieved. The fourth day brought a crisis that tested everything Lysandra had learned about teamwork, problem-solving, and leadership under pressure. A diplomatic delegation arrived unexpectedly, requiring the preparation of an elaborate feast for 50 additional guests with only 4 hours' notice. The normal kitchen routine was completely disrupted, and every worker had to adapt their planned activities to meet the emergency requirements. "Lisa," Master Henri called, "I need you to coordinate with the other workers to reorganize our entire afternoon schedule. We have to completely revise our meal preparation while maintaining our regular obligations. Can you handle that responsibility?" The assignment terrified Lysandra because it required her to exercise leadership without relying on royal authority that her disguised identity couldn't access. She had to convince experienced workers to change their plans based purely on the merits of her suggestions and the logic of her proposed solutions. For the first time in her life, she experienced the challenge of earning respect and cooperation rather than simply demanding compliance. To her amazement, she discovered that her theoretical education in logistics and organization actually proved valuable when applied to practical problems. Her ability to visualize complex systems and identify efficient solutions helped the kitchen team reorganize their work in ways that successfully met the emergency requirements. More importantly, she learned that effective leadership required understanding and respecting the expertise of others rather than simply imposing her will through superior authority. The fifth day marked a turning point in Lysandra's relationship with her fellow workers. Her initial awkwardness and obvious unfamiliarity with manual labor had gradually given way to competence and genuine contributions to the team's efforts. The other workers had begun treating her as a valued colleague rather than an incompetent newcomer, and their casual acceptance of her as an equal provided emotional satisfaction she had never experienced in her privileged isolation. During their brief break that afternoon, Mary shared stories about her family's struggles with illness, crop failures, and economic hardships that had led her to seek employment in the castle kitchens. Her matter-of-fact description of challenges that would have seemed overwhelming to Lysandra revealed resilience, wisdom, and moral strength that the princess had never associated with common people. "It's not easy work," Mary acknowledged, "but it's honest work that feeds my children and keeps us together as a family. I take pride in doing it well, and I appreciate working for a royal household that treats its employees fairly, even if the princess herself has a reputation for being difficult with common folk." Lysandra felt her face burning with shame as she realized that Mary's careful diplomacy was protecting her feelings while acknowledging her own terrible reputation. The people whose lives she had dismissed as unimportant were actually demonstrating greater consideration and kindness than she had ever shown to anyone beneath her social station. The sixth day brought personal conversations that challenged Lysandra's understanding of happiness, success, and the meaning of a life well lived. Thomas spoke about the satisfaction he found in maintaining essential systems that kept the castle functioning smoothly, taking pride in work that was rarely noticed but absolutely necessary. Sarah described her dreams of eventually opening her own bakery, combining her natural talent with knowledge gained through years of patient learning and practice. These conversations revealed people who found genuine meaning and fulfillment in their work, who maintained strong family relationships and community connections, and who possessed moral clarity about what truly mattered in life. Their contentment and sense of purpose contrasted sharply with Lysandra's own previous dissatisfaction and emotional isolation, despite her enormous privileges and advantages. On the final day of her week as a commoner, Lysandra experienced something that transformed her understanding of herself and her role as future queen. A young boy from the village had been injured in an accident, and his mother brought him to the castle seeking medical attention. Master Henri immediately organized the kitchen staff to prepare special foods that would help the child's recovery, while other workers contributed money from their own meager wages to help the family during their crisis. Watching these people, whom she had always considered her social inferiors, demonstrate spontaneous generosity and compassion towards strangers forced Lysandra to confront the emptiness of her own privileged existence. Despite having access to enormous resources and power, she had never used them to help anyone beyond herself. The moral superiority she had always assumed came with noble birth was revealed to be completely absent from her character, while the people she had dismissed as inferior were actually living according to principles she had never bothered to develop. As the week concluded, Lysandra found herself reluctant to abandon her disguise and return to her privileged isolation. The sense of purpose, community, and genuine accomplishment she had discovered while working alongside common people was far more satisfying than the empty adulation and automatic deference she had always received as a princess. For the first time in her life, she understood what it meant to earn respect through her actions rather than simply demanding it through her birthright. When Elena arrived at the kitchens to collect her at the end of the 7th day, Lysandra was surprised to realize that she didn't want the experience to end. The woman she had become during that week, competent, respected, and genuinely useful to others, was someone she liked far better than the arrogant princess she had been before accepting Elena's challenge. Princess Lysandra returned to her royal chambers after 7 days in the castle kitchens as a fundamentally different person than the arrogant young woman who had first encountered Elena's challenging questions. The physical exhaustion she felt was nothing compared to the emotional and intellectual transformation that had occurred through her direct experience of common life. As she sat across from Elena in her private study, no longer behind the protective barrier of her writing desk but in simple chairs arranged as equals, she struggled to find words adequate to express how completely her worldview had changed. "I owe you an apology," Lysandra began, her voice carrying a humility that would have been impossible for her just 1 week earlier. "Everything I believed about common people, about the sources of valuable knowledge, about the meaning of true nobility, it was all not just wrong but harmfully wrong. I have spent 25 years living as a parasite on the efforts of people whose intelligence, character, and contributions I never bothered to recognize or appreciate." Elena listened without interruption as Lysandra continued, her words coming faster as she tried to articulate insights that felt revolutionary in their impact on her understanding of herself and her world. "The people I worked beside this week aren't my inferiors in any meaningful sense. They possess practical wisdom, moral strength, and genuine purpose that my privileged education never provided me. They solve complex problems, care for their families and communities, and find satisfaction in work that actually contributes something valuable to the world." The princess paused, looking out the window at the castle courtyard where she could see some of the same workers she had labored alongside during her week of disguise. "I always assumed that my noble birth gave me natural advantages that justified my authority over others, but the truth is exactly the opposite. My privileges have protected me from developing the capabilities, character, and understanding that real leadership requires." Elena nodded approvingly, recognizing that Lysandra's transformation had been even more complete than she had dared to hope. "And what do you plan to do with these insights, princess? Understanding your past mistakes is valuable, but the real test will be whether you can use that understanding to become the kind of leader your people actually deserve." This question forced Lysandra to move beyond self-criticism toward constructive planning for her future role as queen. "I want to continue learning from common people," she said without hesitation. "Not as disguised experiments, but through genuine relationships based on mutual respect. I want to understand how the different systems that keep our kingdom functioning actually work, and I want to make decisions based on real knowledge rather than theoretical assumptions." She stood and began pacing, her excitement about new possibilities overcoming the exhaustion she felt from her week of physical labor. "I want to establish regular meetings with representatives from different professions and social groups, not formal audiences where they petition for favors, but genuine consultations where I listen to their expertise about problems and potential solutions. I want to visit villages, farms, workshops, and markets, not as royal ceremonies, but as learning opportunities." Elena smiled at the enthusiasm in Lysandra's voice, but she also recognized the challenges that would accompany any attempt to implement such radical changes in royal behavior. These are admirable goals, Princess, but you should understand that many people will resist such changes. The nobles who have benefited from traditional hierarchies won't appreciate having their exclusive access to royal attention challenged by common voices. Let them resist, Lysandra replied with conviction that surprised even her. If noble birth doesn't automatically confer wisdom or virtue, and this week has proven to me that it doesn't, then exclusive noble influence over royal decisions is not just unfair but actively harmful to good governance. The people I worked with this week have insights and perspectives that could improve policies in ways that purely noble advice never could. Elena recognized that Lysandra had indeed undergone the fundamental transformation that the challenge had been designed to produce, but she also wanted to ensure that this change would prove lasting rather than temporary. Princess, you should know that your father has been aware of our entire experiment. He authorized my unconventional approach because his previous attempts to broaden your perspective had all failed completely. This revelation surprised Lysandra, though it also explained how Elena had gained access to the palace and why the king had permitted such an unprecedented challenge to royal authority. Does he know what happened during my week in the kitchens? She asked, suddenly concerned about how her father might react to learning about her complete abandonment of royal dignity. He knows only that you accepted the challenge and completed it successfully, Elena replied. The specific details of your experience and the insights you gained are yours to share or keep private as you choose. But I suspect he would be very pleased to learn that his daughter has finally developed the empathy and understanding that effective leadership requires. Lysandra felt a surge of gratitude toward both Elena and her father for creating the opportunity that had allowed her to discover truths about herself and her world that she might never have encountered otherwise. The painful recognition of her past arrogance and cruelty was balanced by excitement about the possibility of becoming someone worthy of the power and responsibility she would eventually inherit. I want to begin immediately, she declared, already planning how to implement the changes in perspective that her week as a commoner had inspired. I want to meet with Master Henri, Master Thomas, Sarah, Mary, and all the others, not as their superior granting them an audience, but as their colleagues seeking to learn from their knowledge and experience. Elena stood, recognizing that her work as Lysandra's tutor was essentially complete. The transformation she had hoped to inspire had occurred even more thoroughly than she had expected, and the princess was now ready to continue her education through direct engagement with her future subjects rather than requiring further intervention from outside instructors. There's one more thing you should know, Elena said as she prepared to leave. My real name is Elena Hartwell, and I'm actually the daughter of a village blacksmith who educated herself through years of reading, travel, and conversation with learned people from many different social backgrounds. I came here because I believed that a future queen who could learn to respect knowledge regardless of its source might transform this kingdom in ways that would benefit everyone. This final revelation completed Lysandra's understanding of the lessons Elena had been teaching. The woman whose intelligence, wisdom, and challenging questions had forced the princess to confront her own limitations and prejudices was herself living proof that nobility of character was far more important than nobility of birth. Thank you, Lysandra said simply, extending her hand to Elena as an equal. Thank you for having the courage to tell me truths that no one else was willing to speak. And thank you for believing that I was capable of change, even when I had given everyone reason to believe otherwise. As Elena departed, Princess Lysandra stood at her window looking out at the kingdom she would someday rule, but now she saw it through completely different eyes. Instead of a realm populated by inferiors who existed to serve her needs, she saw a community of people whose diverse knowledge, skills, and perspectives could help her become the kind of queen who truly deserved their respect and loyalty. The transformation was complete, and the impossible princess had finally learned the most important lesson of all, that true nobility came from service to others rather than dominance over them.